Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Monday the 27th of September and this is Scotland at 7. I'm Andrew Wilson and today I'm hosting the programme from Edinburgh. First we will have a look at today's coronavirus update, then I will introduce our guest for this evening, and then we will look at the stories behind today's news headlines together. As of 2 p.m. today, since the start of the pandemic, a total of 3,153,963 people in Scotland have been tested through the NHS Scotland labs and the UK Government regional testing centres. Of these, 2,595,993 have been confirmed negative, and 557,970 have tested positive. There are 2,069 new cases of COVID-19 confirmed by a test, although remember, not everyone with the virus will display symptoms, and not all those with symptoms will be tested. There is one new reported death of a person who had tested positive. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 8,535. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 1,023 were in hospital last night, 76 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 a.m. this morning, 4,181,617 people had received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 3,829,881 had received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures show that 136,208 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, and that is an increase of 40 from yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just hospitals. Now, this evening we're lucky enough to be joined by one of our star regular contributors, Newton Mearn's answer to Nick Nairn, Mr. Chris McCusker. Chris, how are you doing this evening?
What an intro, brilliant. Yes, I'm grand, sitting in my front room in my Chesterfield as a champion socialist should.
I'm glad to hear it, Chris, and we're very grateful to you for joining us this evening. Our first story today is that, speaking on France 2 television, the French European Affairs Minister, Clément Beaune, said that the petrol stations problem currently faced in the UK reflected the intellectual fraud that was Brexit. Yesterday, BP said that nearly a third of its British petrol stations had run out of the two main grades of fuel, as panic buying forced the government to suspend competition laws and allow firms to work together to ease the shortages. Petrol station pumps ran dry in major cities across the UK today, and vendors rationed sales as a shortage of truckers strained supply chains to breaking point in the world's sixth largest economy. The SNP immigration spokesperson, Anne McLaughlin MP, has criticised the temporary visa scheme brought in by the UK government to address the labour shortages and supply chain issues caused by Brexit, saying that it completely sidelines Scotland. Ms McLaughlin said the scheme does not go far enough and fails other sectors vital to Scotland's economy, such as food and drink and agriculture. The scheme fails to address the labour shortages and supply chain issues faced by fish and seafood processors and fruit and veg producers, who will continue to struggle into the autumn harvest of Scottish tatties, Brussels sprouts and carrots, all of which will be in demand during the Christmas period. It also fails to address the shortage of vets, who are essential for animal welfare in Scotland's rural communities. Ms McLaughlin has called on the UK government to urgently do 5 key things to ensure more people can choose to live and work in Scotland as soon as possible. To bring in a temporary worker route which lasts for 24 months and allows workers to switch onto other visa routes once they are in the country and have obtained employment. To scrap the hostile environment and the cruel no recourse to public funds rules and allow refugees and asylum seekers the right to work. Abolish the sky-high immigration fees. The UK has some of the most expensive visa costs in the world. Expand the shortage occupation list to include, as recommended by the Migration Advisory Committee, and frequently review the list to ensure the list meets the needs of the changing workforces for every part of the UK, and to increase the number of temporary visas. The current number of 5,000 will not make up for the 100,000 HGV drivers who we have lost. So, Chris, first of all, do you think that 5,000 European HGV drivers are going to answer the call of Grant Shapps to work here for 12 weeks and then be deported as illegal aliens by Priti Patel if they don't leave on Christmas Eve?
Absolutely not, Andrew, and I'll tell you why. It's kind of like that scenario when you were sort of like 18 or 19 and you get barred out of your first pub. You just never went back, and you just avoided it like the plague. So the standard of living in the European Union countries is actually rising. And there's no need for Romanian, Polish, Turkish truck drivers to come to Britain because, I mean, look how they were treated last Christmas. They were put up in an airfield right up until Christmas Eve, with absolutely no regard to their welfare, no regard to health and safety, and scant regard to their needs for getting home and spending Christmas with their families. Now, I mean, if if the scheme was say the likes of 6 months or 9 months, then somebody could make plans on that. But for 3 months at a time, nobody in their right mind is going to just up sticks and leave what is obviously a sustainable lifestyle at this moment in time. Everybody has got used to the fallout of Brexit in all countries, not just Britain, unfortunately. And and I'm speaking, from a bit of experience. My son's actually over in Poland at the moment, and I mean, he was telling me that an awful lot of Polish people, are uh, adapting to the way that life is in Poland. And they're living within their means. And if many other countries or many other EU workers do that within their own countries, then I wouldn't see any reason for them wanting to come here and work for pretty much buttons, really.
Absolutely. No, absolutely, Chris. Now, the French European Affairs Minister spoke perhaps with what struck me as a little bit of Gallic charm when he said intellectual fraud. Now, I'm thinking of what was written on the side of a big red bus. I'm thinking of Johnson and Gove telling the Sun that energy prices would come down after Brexit, and Johnson telling traders in Northern Ireland that after Brexit there would be no paperwork involved to move goods across the Irish Sea. So, were the arguments in favour of this calamitous Brexit? Were they? I don't think they were intellectual fraud. Were they not just flat out lies?
Well, that's you just stole my thunder there because I was about to turn the question on back to yourself and say, well, at what point does an argument become a lie? Quite clearly there were blatant lies to begin with. We're now seeing that, in the aftermath of Brexit, and these were unavoidable catastrophes, that were pointed out at the time that would come to fruition with Britain voting to leave the EU. And now that it is coming to fruition, there only is one way to actually explain what was written on the side of the bus, what the manifesto pledges were, and they were out and out lies. If you foresee something, if I turn around to you and say, "Oh, I'm going to be driving a Porsche Carrera this time next year," and then you meet me next time this year and I'm driving a bashed out old, Mini, then you're going to turn around and say, "Well, were you actually telling the truth, or were you just sort of like, you know, uh, being economical with the truth.
Of course, Chris, thanks. Now, Grant Shapps' plan is intended, I think, to entice about 5,000 HGV drivers and about 5,500 poultry processors to work in the UK, apparently, to work in the UK for the next 12 weeks. Why have the fruit and vegetable industries, fishing and shellfish, abattoirs, vets, and all the other key sectors which are also suffering from acute labour shortages, why do you think they've not been included in this plan?
Well, because basically the Tories are not capable of thinking any further ahead than 3 months at any one given time. Obviously, nobody's going to be picking soft fruit in the middle of Christmas, but by the same token, they are only concentrating on getting enough people in to pluck their turkeys, pull up their parsnips and their potatoes, because that's the British staple diet at Christmas time. And the other industries that are woefully left without any sort of like backup of workers that they could call on are being basically thrown to the wind. If you look at the hospitality sector, I think at one point in time was reliant on 36% of EU migration on a seasonal basis in order just to cope with the demand of, the sort of like spring, summer, sort of like, autumn trade. That is obviously boosted in Scotland by such events as the Edinburgh Fringe and all the rest of it, where people could actually say, right, okay, I can come to Scotland and get work for 6 months and then, go back to the likes of Poland, Romania, Ukraine, wherever, and, sort of like carry on with my university studies or whatever, and then possibly come to look back. Such was the fluidity of the freedom of movement at that time. It was an easy thing to do. Now it's not so easy. It's festooned with red tape. You've got the right-wing rhetoric of the fact that, this country overwhelmingly, if you, and I use the word overwhelmingly, if you view it from the Brexit side, that they think that 51% is overwhelming, then they overwhelmingly voted to be more insular and to be more how can you put it politely, be more vacillated in their attitudes towards anybody with a different colour of skin, let alone a different language set altogether.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, Chris. And one more question on this story. The press in Germany now refer to this island as the kingdom of empty shelves. And I certainly thought that my local co-op was looking a bit more bare earlier this afternoon. So, Chris, how much more empty are shelves going to have to become before the penny starts to drop with the folks that you just mentioned and who the Italian press are now calling the Tory Brexiteers?
I think and this is something that I spoke about last year. Is throughout this, can we say, perfect storm of the forecoming of a winter of discontent, I think actually Nicola Sturgeon has actually seen this coming, and the this once this is played out in the leafy suburbs of Scotland, such as Newton Mearns and the more affluent areas of our islands, and it hits those middle income Tory voting people, who have got much to lose. It's there's no point in charming people. Well, there is a point, obviously, but I mean, I don't really see that there's there's not a hard argument to be made for people who predominantly shop in Aldi's and Lidl's. But there's a bigger argument to be made for people that shop in Marks and Spencers and Waitrose, because once there's no quail's eggs and foie gras on the readily available on the shelves, they're going to start asking questions of their Tory councillors, and then that's going to feed back into the actual Tory party itself. And they're going to ask themselves a lot of questions as to, what exactly is going wrong. So, in some ways, I actually think that Nicola's actually, not content to put up with a winter of discontent. I don't believe that she's, willing to inflict, any more damage than what's going to happen. But to be honest with you, the damage was already done the day that the UK voted to leave the EU, and this is just how it's playing out.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. We'll move on to our second story now, and that relates to the Labour Party conference, which has started in Brighton. Labour members tore into rule changes proposed by Keir Starmer to give MPs more sway over leadership elections, but the new rules were carried over the line after the trade union Unison gave its backing at the last minute. The narrow 53% victory on the conference floor ended a difficult weekend for Starmer, in which he was repeatedly forced to water down his proposals. The changes double the threshold of MP nominations needed for candidates to make future leadership ballots, which the left has said will ensure a less diverse shortlist. It will also make it harder for members to deselect MPs. Before the vote, shadow cabinet ministers were dispatched to lobby members and trade unionists with rumours that Starmer could lose it. But with hours to go, Unison delegates opted to back the changes, giving him a near certain win. But the debate in the conference hall, watched by Starmer from the stage, was dominated by criticism of the Labour leader and the proposals. Dave Ward, the General Secretary of the CWU union, said that conference was being misled over the rule changes. The conference has also passed a motion criticising the new Australia-UK-US AUKUS military alliance following a card vote. The emergency motion, which described AUKUS as a dangerous move that will undermine world peace, passed by 70.35% to 29.65%. This is an embarrassment for Keir Starmer, who told MPs that Labour welcomed the AUKUS announcement when Boris Johnson made a statement about it in the Commons earlier this month. So, Chris, as a trade unionist, albeit one not aligned to the Labour Party, what's your reaction to the first couple of days of this year's Labour Party conference, the first with Sir Keir Starmer as leader?
Well, thank you, first of all, for pointing that out, that I'm no longer aligned to the Labour Party. What do you say about the machinations that are happening within the UK Labour Party at this moment in time? They are, to my mind, I think that they're in serious. There is a serious possibility of them imploding yet further. I've watched on social media today that quite an awful lot of Unison members are cutting up the membership cards. They're absolutely disgusted at the way that their leaders have decided to, for want of a better word, capitulate at the last minute. There is just so much to come out of the Labour Party conference at this moment in time. You've got the Angela Rayner affair, where she's been lambasted by the right-wing press for actually telling the truth and speaking her mind. And you've also got the Shadow Chancellor, Andy MacDonald, has just resigned because he was asked to defend actually arguing against the £15 an hour living wage. So, and also again, I actually believe that it was also asked to support the £20 cutting universal credit, which, it shows that, there are some people within UK Labour that have got some integrity and a bit of backbone. But I think their tenure within that party will be very short-lived under Sir Keir Starmer.
Well, that's a good point, Chris. Do you think that these changes to the rules for leadership elections in the Labour Party will make any difference? Will they make the Labour Party any more electable?
No. They won't make the Labour. Unfortunately, have. I left Labour after the tenure of John Smith, God rest his soul. And I didn't like the way that Tony Blair was taking the UK Labour, the direction of travel, such as the vision for New Labour. And, I had high hopes for Jeremy Corbyn, and I was sadly let down with him. And now Keir Starmer looks to me like he's trying to reinvent the wheel. Do you know what I mean? He's trying to go back to the values of New Labour, and in doing that, he's leaving an awful lot of low-paid, manual skilled workers far behind. If you remember what New Labour was all about, it was all about the upwardly mobile. 20, 30 somethings, and it was targeting, quite cynically, actually, blue chip collar workers and stuff like that, people in IT, and this was a new direction. The industrial heritage of Labour was left behind because of the fact that they were woefully inept to stand up to Margaret Thatcher. So she successfully managed to decimate that side of the sector, and all they had left were, were the blue collar jobs, and trying to galvanise the trade movement, the trade union movement within that, and it worked for a couple of years. But obviously, the undoing of New Labour at that time was obviously the fallout of Iraq. So I think if Keir Starmer's going in that direction, I don't think that the party is going to gain any traction whatsoever.
Thanks, Chris. We'll move on now to our next story, and that is that letters offering a coronavirus vaccination to all 12 to 15-year-olds who haven't yet received their jab are arriving from today, Monday. Drop-in clinics have been available to this age group for the last week, and now scheduled appointments, starting this week, are being issued to all of those who are eligible. The letters will contain an information leaflet which all parents and carers should read with their children so they can make an informed decision about getting access to the vaccine. This information is also available online at NHS Inform. Parents and carers are encouraged to accompany their children to community-based appointments where possible, so any questions that they may have can be raised with staff on site. In some rural locations, this age group will be offered the JAGs through their school vaccination programme instead of a community setting, and they will receive letters and leaflets home from school. In these situations, parents and carers who have questions they wish to discuss with a vaccinator before the in-school session can go to any drop-in clinic and ask for advice. So, Chris, I think I've seen and heard rather more vaccine denial from folks in the context of vaccinating 12 to 15-year-olds rather than vaccinating older folks. Why do you think is it that folks seem more vociferous in opposing vaccinations for younger people when it's been demonstrated that the COVID-19 vaccines are safe and effective for this age group?
I think there's a certain amount of old wives' tales going about that younger people have got a greater version of self-immunity than what older people have, and therefore, we shouldn't be wasting the vaccines on, the 12 to 15 age group. And I think that's actually going to create, a false narrative in the long run, because we know that the vaccine is the best guard against this virus. Even if you're double vaccinated, even if, as we're led to believe at Christmas, anybody that's double vaccinated might get another one, in which case you're triple vaccinated, you can still catch it. And that's just a long and short of it. And I don't think the arguments of the fact that younger people have got a better immune system than older people, I don't think those arguments actually stand up. From a sort of like a food science side of everything, I think an awful lot of it depends on your diet. And if you've obviously got a good, healthy diet, then, as opposed to kids who have got, I think it's safe to say, the majority of kids have got a questionable diet. The likes of, chicken nuggets and, quarter pounders and the likes. Of course, other substances are available. You don't find that consumed in the sort of like 55 to 75 age group. Who are sort of like eating their steamed vegetables and stuff like that. Things just picked up. Locally harvested and all the rest of it. So I think that people need to sort of like do a wee bit more research and allowed I think that we said at the start that we were going to be directed by the best science advice available. And if the scientific advice is saying that this is the way to go, then, why don't we just follow the science?
Absolutely, Chris. One other quick question in this story. At one point earlier, the UK government said a vaccination committee, the JCVI, was largely opposed to COVID vaccination for children under 16. And I think that then began to cause concerns because that committee didn't reach its final conclusion until after the schools in Scotland had returned. Is this do you think this is maybe an indication that the UK-wide approach doesn't necessarily work in some ways, in some circumstances?
I think, I'm actually happy again that the Scottish government seem to be taking the lead. As we've seen before, we'll get about 2 or 3 weeks of bleating from the unionist parties about this issue, and then when the English government catches up, then it'll all be forgotten about, and things will just go back to normal.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks, Chris. We'll move on to our next story now, and that is that the Scottish Green Party has expressed concern at plans for a new generation of nuclear reactors, following news that the UK Government Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, Kwasi Kwarteng, is poised to support 16 mini-nuclear reactors across the UK. It is not just the UK government that supports the nuclear industry, but also the Labour Party, which has consistently supported new reactors. Commenting, the Scottish Greens spokesperson for the Environment and Climate, Mark Ruskell MSP, said that nuclear power is neither safe nor reliable, and the last thing that Scotland needs is a backward step towards the nuclear industry, which would cost hundreds of millions of pounds while leaving a toxic legacy for centuries. Mr Ruskell said the Scottish Greens in government are doubling Scotland's onshore wind capacity and developing new opportunities for marine renewables. These are changes that will make a vital difference. The anti-climate Tories in Westminster cannot be trusted to do the right thing for the environment. That is why Scotland must have full control over our energy policy so we can chart a different course and invest in our communities with lasting jobs and industries that have a future, he added. So, Chris, does this news suggest that Kwasi Kwarteng can see that he is going to be hopelessly squeezed between rocketing gas prices in Europe, Asia and the US, the huge time and cost overruns which are a constant feature of building new large nuclear power stations, and the imminent end of life of the UK's current nuclear generation facilities? And he sees that he's going to be squeezed by these things all happening at the same time.
Yeah, and I think to a certain extent they're running scared, and they're probably grateful at the amount of support that they're getting from the Labour Party. in this regard. Look, Scotland is diametrically opposed to any form of nuclear whatsoever. We don't need it. We don't need it. We certainly don't need nuclear submarines. That's no revelation. But we certainly don't need nuclear reactors in order to operate our power stations. It's been proven time and time again. Scotland has got a vast resource in offshore and onshore wind energy. And the fact of the matter is that wind energy is not as profitable as nuclear. So therefore, the capitalists will obviously go with the most profitable cause of energy and fuel supply. Anything that's going to make their donors and hedge fund managers money, then that's the easy opt out for them, as far as I can see, and that's why they are diametrically opposed to the renewable industry, because again, much of it is caught up in red tape and bureaucratic nonsense, because the energy powers around energy are completely reserved to Westminster, and Scotland's not able to move on with the plans that we have for that sector. And until Scotland becomes an independent country, I don't think that we'll be able to see the vast potential, and then be able to show a kind of like black and white sort of like plan and say, well, look, we've done this as opposed to you doing that, which is better. Because I don't think that the Tories want a viable option that is obviously going to show their choices up as being the wrong choices.
Absolutely, Chris. And just quickly, you touched on this in passing. In your own view, just how many of the supposed 16 mini nuclear power plants do you think are going to be conveniently located as far away from the southeast of England as possible?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that, because I've seen a diagram, albeit briefly, on social media, and I think it was relating to a Jeremy Vine show. Again, that is, if there was a show created for the average couch potato to stick needles into their eyes, then that is that very show. And there was a map of dare I say, Great Britain, and they had all these wee dots around the map, and they had one in Scotland. Right,
oh, well,
it was
we'll
just
see.
one in Scotland. But to be honest with you, even one in Scotland is one too many, in my humble opinion.
Of course. Thanks, Chris. We'll move on to our next story now, and that is that the world's poorest countries have said that they may struggle to meet visa requirements and cover all COVID-19 quarantine costs for the COP26 climate summit, raising concerns that some might not be able to attend in person at all. The UN conference, meant to spur countries to make bigger commitments to slash greenhouse gas emissions, is due to start in Glasgow on October 31st. Bhutan's Sonam Phuncho Wangdi, chair of the Least Developed Countries Group, has said that he is still concerned about the possibility of getting delegates to COP26 to negotiate key issues about the global response to climate change that will have such profound effect on people in less developed countries. The UK government said last week that government ministers travelling to COP26 plus 2 staff members would be exempt from quarantine requirements when they arrive. But other delegates from countries on coronavirus red lists, such as Angola, Ethiopia and Haiti, must quarantine in a hotel for up to 10 days prior to attending the summit. The UK government has said that it will cover the cost of hotel quarantines for delegates from poorer nations. Wangdi said some countries' delegations were not led by ministers, meaning they would need to visit a visa centre to complete their application to attend COP26. Delegates from 25 of the poorer countries would have to leave their territories to go to visa centres in another state, a challenging process during the pandemic. So, Chris, who could have predicted that there would be visa issues for people visiting Brexit Island for COP26?
Who could have predicted that COP26 would throw up such vast inequalities? Because that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about inequality. I personally, and I think my green credentials have been well documented, not just on this evening's show, but well throughout the last couple of years in my participation with Broadcasting Scotland. But to be honest with you, during the pandemic, I don't think that COP26 should be actually held in Glasgow. At this moment in time, I don't see the point in having a conference about green issues where world leaders are burning up air fuel in order to come to Glasgow in order to discuss the potential reduction of the various harmful gases in the atmosphere. So I think that's a bit of a contradiction in terms. Also, I'm not in favour of COP26 being in Glasgow for the simple reason is that Scotland isn't in charge of it. It's not Glasgow's COP26, it's the UK government's COP26. We will get frozen out of any participation in COP26, which again, actually, you could argue, suits Scotland because, again, it will just show how much disregard the UK government have for Scotland. And again, I'll go back to our opening discussion about Nicola playing her cards close to her chest. I think, come January, again, once we've discussed what's come out of COP26 and all the rest of it, I think, that Scotland will go at that, well, it didn't really benefit us in any such way, shape or form. So, we had no say at the table. So, if we were independent, of course we would have a say at the table.
Absolutely, Chris. Thank you. We'll move on to our next story now, and that's returning to Europe, where the centre-left contender to fill Angela Merkel's shoes has announced his intention to forge a social, ecological and liberal coalition following Sunday's knife-edge German national vote, as momentum slips from the outgoing Chancellor's own designated successor. The voters have made themselves very clear, Olaf Scholz of the SDP said at a press conference this morning. He pointed out that his centre-left party, the Greens, and the pro-business Free Democratic Party had all picked up significant numbers of new votes at the election, while the Conservative Christian Democratic Union suffered a loss in support of almost 9 percentage points. And that's why we have a visible mandate that the citizens of this country have formulated, said Scholz, who is Vice-Chancellor in the outgoing government. The Greens and the Free Democrats, who achieved 14.8% and 11.5% of the vote, and could form a stronger bloc than either the SPD or the CDU-CSU, have agreed to hold exploratory talks with each other before entering negotiations properly, the FDP leader Christian Lindner said today. As well as joining a power-sharing deal with the SPD, nicknamed Traffic Light after the party's traditional colours, the Greens and FDP could theoretically lend their support to a so-called Jamaica coalition with the CDU, led by its Chancellor candidate, Armin Laschet. As exit polls on Sunday projected the SPD and CDU to be tied in a dead heat, Laschet initially sounded bullish in his determination to lead the next government, saying, "We will do everything to form a government." But after the SPD's lead increased as votes were counted, and it went 1.6 percentage points ahead of the CDU, which also recorded its lowest ever share of the vote, Laschet gave a more modest impression the next day without ceding his claim completely. So as I was saying, Chris, and also we've seen analysis of the results from late last night by the pollsters Infratest DIMAP, it showed that the SPD had managed to secure the support of about 1.36 million CDU voters. It appeared that the CDU is heading for its worst result in a federal election, and according to this analysis, it also lost around 900,000 voters to the Green Party and 340,000 to the pro-business Free Democrats. So after 16 years of Mrs. Merkel's centre-right chancellorship, do you think the tectonic plates of German politics are beginning to shift?
Yeah, I think they are, and that's not to be disparaging of Angela Merkel. I think actually she's been, a steady hand at the tiller, shall we say, if we're using nautical terms. But yeah, I mean, I think it is very welcome, obviously, that Europe seem to be, creeping towards the left. I'm not saying, that they are going towards the left, but they're creeping towards it. And obviously, it's great to see the Greens, in Europe having a bigger platform and, hopefully sharing the centre stage on, a plethora of issues because, as we were discussing earlier on, there's an awful lot of green policies that are so prevalent in today's political spectrum that, we need strong green voices. And, it's no happy collision, the fact that Greens are, predominantly left and left of centre. But I'm a slightly wary about the term social democrats. I much prefer the term democratic socialists. But then that's a personal choice, obviously with a huge caveat in that bracket as well as Republican.
Yes,
Because
of course.
there are an awful lot of people don't, or an awful lot of people are maybe not aware of how intricate German politics are, because
Yes.
there are so many individual, independent, uh, sort of like small states within Germany who do their own thing. And I'm talking regional wise,
Hmm.
and it's not like Berlin dictates to the rest
No,
of Germany the way that London dictates to the rest of the UK. There is
absolutely.
an awful lot of regional autonomy going on
Yep.
in Germany, which I think is that it's obviously the way that things are going within the EU, and I would like to think that if Scotland was in the EU, we could start looking on a regional basis as well as to what
Yeah.
actually fits. The Highlands and Islands, the Central Belt, the Lowlands. If the Lowlands want to, go off to, and play their right wing rhetoric, along with their neighbours across the border, then that's entirely up to themselves. At least the country would still be an
Okay.
independent one.
Yes. Thanks, Chris. Now then, the International Criminal Court's new prosecutor has asked the court to relaunch an inquiry into alleged crimes against humanity committed by the Taliban and supporters of Islamic State in Afghanistan since 2003. The move by Karim Ahmed Khan QC shows a determination to use international law to investigate not only past but also contemporary crimes against humanity. The Hague-based ICC has notified the Taliban via Afghanistan's embassy in the Netherlands that it intends to resume an investigation. The previous ICC inquiry was deferred in April 2020 following a request by the then Afghan government of Ashraf Ghani to be given time to gather evidence in cooperation with ICC lawyers. Mr. Khan, who is 3 months into his 9-year tenure as ICC prosecutor, said odious and criminal acts should stop immediately, and investigations commence to vindicate the principles that were established 75 years ago at Nuremberg and to honour humanity's basic responsibility to itself. His submission states there is no longer the prospect of a genuine and effective domestic investigation into crimes within Afghanistan. His proposal includes a plan to deprioritise, but not drop, any alleged war crimes committed by the US and the then Afghan armies, since they are not ongoing. The prosecutor expects to face criticism for deprioritising the US from the investigation, but he states the gravity, scale, and continuing nature of the alleged crimes by the Taliban and Islamic State, which include attacks on civilians, targeted extrajudicial executions, persecution of women and girls, crimes against children, demand focus and proper resources from my office if we are to construct credible cases capable of being proved beyond reasonable doubt in the courtroom. One of the criteria for deciding whether to resume the stalled inquiry turns on the extent to which domestic legal remedies are available. In his submission, Mr. Khan says his investigation need not require the ICC to come to a view on either the de jure or de facto government in the country. It also says there is no institution inside or outside the country that, in his view, can legitimately seek any further deferral of the ICC inquiry. One of the crimes likely to be investigated is the suicide bombing on 26 August at Kabul airport, which was claimed by Islamic State in Khorasan province. Now, Chris, we're not going to ask you to discuss the detail of international criminal law this evening. However, do you think that it's relevant that Karim Ahmed Khan QC, the ICC prosecutor who has made this request for the investigation to restart, do you think it's relevant that he's a Scot by birth and also that he's a member of the Ahmadi Muslim community, a minority community which has been notoriously persecuted by other Muslims, in particular in Pakistan, but also in Afghanistan since the early 20th century?
Yeah, I think that's wonderfully highlighted by your good self there, Andrew. Thankfully, you're not asking me to comment on the substance of international debate on the rights and wrongs of what's been happening in the Middle East. But what I'm really more happy about the fact that the Coalition for Genocide Response has also welcomed this announcement as well, basically they were saying that in recent months there's been a serious risk of crimes of borderline atrocity nature, including genocide against the Hazara community, as well as many other communities. And for this to be highlighted again, I think is absolutely fantastic, because it's for far too long the West has ignored maybe ignored is not the correct terminology, possibly overlooked the internal rulings, would possibly be a better fit of words there. Yes. Listen, if there's good to come out of this inquiry and any other inquiry into the previous indiscretions, shall we say, of various groups within the Middle East, it has to be welcomed.
Absolutely. Thanks, Chris. We'll come back to Scotland for our next story, and that is that councils have been given a further £10 million to provide grants to tenants who have fallen behind on their rent as a result of the pandemic and who are, as a result, at a risk of eviction. The grants will help tenants who are struggling financially as a direct result of the pandemic, allowing them to reduce or pay off their rent arrears. They will be available to tenants in both the private and social rented sectors. This is part of a package of measures available to local authorities to prevent homelessness, alongside discretionary housing payments and advice on maximising income. The grants also come on top of the Scottish Government's £10 million Tenant Hardship Loan Fund. The Housing Cabinet Secretary Shona Robeson said, "We have been doing all we can to support tenants who are struggling as a result of the pandemic, And this latest funding takes our total housing support to almost £39 million. These grants will support tenants and landlords who are willing to work together to address rent arrears and to agree a repayment plan to ensure the tenant is able to avoid eviction. Now, Chris, there is to be no application process for a tenant or a landlord to use these grant funding. Instead, local authorities will use their own discretion to determine whether a grant payment is appropriate in individual circumstances. So do you think that will work, given how hard-pressed councils have been during the pandemic and seem still to be?
It's debatable as to whether it will actually work on paper. Councils do have, and this is not a sinister thing, but councils do have an awful lot of information on people who are using their council stock. So they know who is getting housing benefit. They know at what level they're getting housing benefit. They obviously know what income that they've got and what income they don't. So yes, it can work. If it does work, I think it will be good because it will cut down an awful lot of bureaucracy and red tape. It has to be welcomed because it's a positive step that has been announced by Shona Robinson, and it means that we're doing something to again tackle the vast inequality that some people are living through. And again, as someone who has, I say recently, it was 6 years ago that I was homeless. And it's not a nice situation to be in. It's not a nice situation to find yourself in through no fault of your own. Yes. But even I think it's actually worse of a situation to find out that you've been let down by various agencies. Let down possibly by. It could be viewed by your own government, I had a lot of animosity, at one point in time towards the Scottish government. Lonely nights in the middle of a country, sort of like a road, sleeping in the back of a van because I had nowhere to go and I had no heating and stuff like that. And I felt an awful lot of anger towards the Scottish government. And I think an awful lot of people would do, even if they were living in sort of like temporary accommodation, because an awful lot of people, all they need is somewhere to securely shut the door and feel secure, and then go on from there and start rebuilding their lives.
Thanks, Chris. I think that thank you for your input and thank you for your thoughts there. Also in Scotland, the national programme to eliminate mental health stigma and discrimination has been awarded a further £5 million of Scottish Government funding for the next 5 years. The continuing investment in See Me, which has been announced alongside the launch of their new strategy, With Fairness in Mind, will allow See Me to carry on their important work as part of the wider national response to the mental health impact of the pandemic. COVID-19 has had a substantial impact on mental health, and the Mental Health Transition and Recovery Plan was developed with stakeholders and third sector representatives and sets out the medium and long-term actions the Scottish Government is taking to address the additional pressures on Scotland's mental health brought about by the pandemic. The strategy seems to have three aims: to tackle the deep-rooted stigma and discrimination that directly affects people who experience mental health problems in Scotland today, to make Scotland a global leader in anti-stigma activity, and to increase learning to change attitudes, behaviours and cultures to end mental health stigma and discrimination. Now, Chris, the Mental Health Foundation is helping to deliver this strategy, and of course they've found themselves calling out people like Piers Morgan in the past. That has to be a good thing. Their research suggests that 2 out of every 3 adults in Britain have faced a mental health problem at some point in their lifetime. With strategies like With Fairness in Mind, could this now be the generation that finally acknowledges the need for change and begins to do something about it?
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. And I have to say from the offset, it's always okay not to be okay. And that's coming from someone who struggles with his own mental health, his own depression, but not only that, who looks after someone who's got severe mental health issues. And in fact, as well as that, my daughter has mental health issues as well. I have done some great work with a friend of mine and Walk a Mile in My Shoes, and we well, I mean he walked around the UK, for God's sake. But thing mate, I done some stuff, alongside that group, which involved people, and fairly high profile people, more notably a certain chap called Neil Lennon when he was the manager of Hibernian. He was a great supporter of that cause. And, causes like that, causes like the See Me, the group that my daughter's involved in, the Me Too. They are fantastic groups at raising not just awareness and trying to reduce the stigma of mental health, but also enhance it at the same time and make it more acceptable. So that people no longer sort of like take long stares at children with Down syndrome and all the rest of it, and that has to be obviously welcomed, and I think that it has moved on, certainly since the likes of the 1970s and the 1980s, where mental health was obviously, it wasn't exactly a taboo word, but it was kind of like, it was just something not willing to be openly discussed. So
Of course,
if we have more discussion and more awareness, then obviously we have more acceptance.
Thank you, Chris. And that was our final news item this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. If you would like to support us, then please consider subscribing or donating to Broadcasting Scotland. You will find the link to do that on the screen now. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. Meantime, we will be here at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening for the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in and join us then. Thank you to Chris, the Galloping Gourmet, for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I really, really appreciate that introduction.
No problem. Thank you too for joining us on Broadcasting Scotland. And that's the way it is at very nearly Scotland at 8. I hope that you have a very peaceful evening.